Why did she stop walking when she saw the words, "Do not launch" on the board? Because she knew the names behind that mission tag. And she knew what overrun really meant. It was supposed to be another morning at Fob Salerno. The kind of morning soldiers describe with shrugs and dust. The kind where nothing happens until everything does. The horizon glowed pale orange, the hum of generators filled the air, and rotors shimmered like blades of heat in the distance. Mechanics leaned into engine bays, crew chiefs checked tie-downs, and pilots walked their birds like preachers packing before a sermon. To most, it was routine. To Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Mitchell, it was ritual. She moved slow, deliberate, palm tracing the Black Hawk's skin like it could feel her touch. She brushed the skids, ran her fingers along each rotor blade, paused by the tail. Some called it superstition. It was. It was discipline. Her bird trusted her, and she believed that meant knowing every bolt by heart. She was 27, barely 5'5", often dismissed as the careful one. And yet, careful was what had kept her alive through 3 tours. Careful was why she knew how wind bent around these ridgelines. Careful was why she could fly blind through smoke and still land between 2 mountain teeth. Careful wasn't fear. It was courage measured to the inch of rotor clearance. But that morning, something broke the rhythm. Pinned under the plexiglass of the mission board was a single tag, black marker, heavy strokes, circled twice. "Do not launch, ambush zone too hot." Her eyes followed it down to a line of small text, coordinates, elevation, unit name. 2nd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Her chest tightened. She knew those men. 2 weeks earlier, she dropped them off on a ridgeline north of coast. They joked about Chow Hall coffee, slapped her shoulder on their way out, called her Mitchell the Magnet, because rounds always seemed to miss her bird by inches. Paratroopers. Tough, loud, brave, the kind who made a pilot feel like family. And now, next to their unit tag, one word repeated in red ink across every field report. Overrun. She stared at it, lips pressed thin, heartbeat like static in her ears. Inside the briefing room, the air was stale. A dozen officers hunched over maps. The radios crackled with noise that didn't sound human anymore, just pressure and fear bleeding through. Mitchell stood in the doorway, helmet tucked under her arm. "If we wait," she said quietly, "we'll be flying in for body bags." The words hung like smoke. No one answered. Someone shifted a pencil. Someone else swallowed hard. Finally, her company commander looked up, jaw set tight. "You're not cleared to launch," he said. "That's final." Mitchell met his eyes. For a heartbeat, she almost said it, the thing burning behind her teeth. "Those are our men." But she didn't. She just nodded, turned, and walked out. The corridor outside was dim. Dust motes danced in the light cutting through broken blinds. Her boots echoed, slow, hollow, as she moved toward the flight line. Each step felt heavier, louder, like the ground itself was warning her to stop. Outside, the heat hit her like a wave. The sun was up now, turning the tarmac into a mirror of white light. Her crew waited by the bird. Specialist O'Hara, her door gunner, 23, freckles, always smiling like the war hadn't found him yet. Staff Sergeant Keller, her crew chief, older, quiet, the kind of man who said little but always saw too much. They looked up as she approached. "Ma'am," O'Hara asked, wiping sweat off his brow, "what's the word?" Mitchell didn't answer right away. She just ran her hand along the nose of the Black Hawk, tail number 31, felt the warmth of the metal beneath her palm. Machines had memory. They remembered who treated them right. Finally she spoke. "Orders are scrubbed." She paused. "But if we wait, they're done." Keller frowned. "You mean?" She looked up at the horizon, where faint tracer fire already flickered in the distance, barely visible in daylight, like ghosts screaming for help. "You can almost hear the valley breathing war," she murmured. Word spread across the line before she even climbed in. Other pilots watched with sidelong glances. Some shook their heads. Others just avoided looking at all. Everyone knew what it meant. Whoever flew into that valley was not coming back. Inside the ops tent, command chatter turned frantic. Reports were coming faster now, paratroopers low on ammo, enemy closing in, comms cutting out. A squad net went silent mid-transmission. And that was enough. Mitchell stood outside her bird, helmet in hand. Her commander's voice barked from the radio tower behind her. No launches. We wait for F-16s. That's an order. She didn't look back. Every war story has a moment where choice turns into legend, where someone decides, this can't be how it ends. This was hers. She climbed into the cockpit. Helmet on. Visor down. Switches flipped with the rhythm of memory. The turbine screamed to life, rotors slicing air, kicking up a storm of dust. Over the radio. Black Hawk 2-4, you are not cleared to launch. Confirm hold position. Mitchell pressed transmit. Negative, 2-4 is en route. Silence, then chaos, overlapping voices, orders, disbelief. She flicked the radio off. The only voices she needed were inside this cockpit. Strap in, she said quietly. O'Hara locked his gun mount. Keller took his station. And then they lifted. The world blurred beneath them, tents shrinking, ridges rising, the earth folding into jagged teeth of stone. Within minutes, the valley came into view. And with it hell. Mortar rounds walked the riverbed. Machine guns stitched dirt like sewing needles. Smoke hung low, thick and oily, rising from impact craters. The paratroopers were down there, pinned, out of ammo, some dragging the wounded into shallow ditches, some still firing, stubborn, hopeless, alive only because they hadn't realized how impossible it was. The radio came alive again. 2-4, break off. You're entering a hornet's nest. Mitchell didn't break off. She dropped lower. 50 feet. 30. Branches whipped the fuselage. Rotor wash carved furrows in the dirt. She knew the math. Mortars couldn't adjust that fast this low, and machine gunners on the ridges couldn't depress their barrels far enough to track her. Hold steady, she said, voice calm, the kind of calm that comes right before everything breaks. Tracer fire licked past the cockpit, green, red, gold. RPG trails arched like claws reaching for the sky. She threw the cyclic left hard. The bird rolled, metal screaming. O'Hara opened up, M240 thundering, brass clattering to the floor. I've got M, he yelled over the headset. Then they saw them. 250 paratroopers scattered along the riverbed, faces streaked with mud and blood, eyes wide as they looked up and saw the impossible. The sky, which had been their grave, had just opened with hope. 2-4 inbound. Mitchell's voice cut through the comms like lightning. Keller braced for landing. Skids clear, clear, drop. Mitchell flared hard, slammed the bird onto a strip of rock barely wide enough for its skids. Nose high, tail exposed, the most vulnerable position a pilot can take. Load them fast, she shouted. They came running, limping, carrying the wounded, throwing gear to the ground to make space. Inside, the cabin filled with the smell of blood and cordite. Screams, gunfire, rotor noise, a single chaotic heartbeat. A mortar hit nearby, the shockwave throwing dust and rocks against the fuselage. Another whistled overhead. Keller, how many? Too many. Good, she said. We'll make it work. O'Hara's gun jammed. He cleared it with a slap and kept firing. Keller pulled men aboard, hands bleeding. Go, go, go. The warning panel glowed red. Overload, stress alarms flashing. She ignored them all. Hold tight, she muttered, eyes forward. We're not flying into fire, we're flying to them. Collective up, engines howled. The Black Hawk clawed off the rocks, tail scraping, rising through chaos, rounds sparking off the hull. the world shaking like it wanted her gone. Behind her a soldier sobbed, another prayed. Mitchell didn't hear them. She only heard the engine, her heartbeat in metal form. The valley spat everything it had: mortars, machine guns, hatred. But she was already climbing. And when they cleared the ridgeline, for one breathless second, the radio was silent. Then a voice broke through, tired, cracked, but alive. "To 4, we see you, we see you." Mitchell exhaled slowly. Her hands trembled. She didn't let go of the cyclic, not yet. They weren't done, not by half. Because below, in the dust and the smoke, men were still fighting, and she wasn't leaving until the last one was out. Why would anyone turn back, after flying through hell and living? Because logic said stop. Because command was screaming for her to stop. Because no one sane flies back into the fire. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't hearing logic anymore. She was hearing the men still trapped below. The radio net was chaos, fragmented words, screams, coordinates shouted through static. 2 squads cut off, North Ridge collapsing, RPG teams God there. Then silence. That awful hollow silence. Mitchell knew what it meant. The valley wasn't done. And neither was she. The Black Hawk thundered low across the ridgelines, engines straining, frame trembling under the weight of the wounded packed inside. Dust trailed behind like smoke from a dying comet. Inside, men clung to the floor netting, faces streaked with dirt and disbelief. Keller called from the back, voice shaking. "We're overloaded by a ton, ma'am." "I know," Mitchell answered, eyes locked on the horizon. "Hydraulics are redlining." "I know," she repeated softly, "but we're not down yet." She coaxed the bird home, every motion delicate, careful, measured, the kind of flying that happens between instinct and prayer. When Fob Salerno's concrete strip came into view, the radio tower erupted. 2-4 confirmed status. 2-4, you weren't cleared for launch. 2-4, what's your load count? She pressed transmit, voice steady but low. 24 souls aboard, multiple wounded, request medical on pad. There was a pause, then disbelief. Say again. She didn't. She just brought the bird down, hard, fast, kicking up a storm of dust. The skids slammed into the pad and the back doors swung open. Men poured out, limping, crawling, dragging each other into the arms of medics. Blood on boots, smoke on helmets, eyes wide, haunted, but alive. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered from the line crew. They're all alive." Command didn't cheer, they stared. Mitchell sat in the cockpit for 2 seconds, no more, her breathing sharp, controlled. Then she turned to Keller. "How many still down there?" He blinked. "What?" "The 504th. How many still in the valley?" Keller hesitated. "At least 100. O'Hara leaned forward, wiping grime from his face. "Ma'am, you're not thinking." Mitchell was already flipping switches. The Black Hawk groaned as systems strained to life again. Warning lights flashed like angry stars across her dashboard. "Ma'am," Keller barked, "we can't take another load, she's bleeding pressure." Mitchell's eyes were calm, but her jaw was set. "Then we'll bring them out faster." Keller stared at her, then at the bird, then nodded once, quiet and grim. "Copy that." O'Hara smacked a fresh belt into the M240. "Let's do it." Outside on the flight line, a mechanic shouted, "You're not cleared, Mitchell." She didn't answer. The rotors thundered, whipping sand into a storm. And then, once again, she was gone. The valley waited like a predator. Smoke still clung to its edges, gunfire still cracked in bursts that echoed off the cliffs. The enemy had adapted. They'd seen her route. They knew her angles. RPG teams had repositioned. Mortars were ranging faster. This time, they were ready for her. "Here we go," O'Hara muttered, fingers white on the handles of his gun. Mitchell dropped low again, skimming the ridges, hugging every shadow. She knew these mountains like scars on her hands, the downdrafts, the traps, the air currents that could either kill you or save you. "Stay tight," she said. "No chatter." Tracer fire erupted from the left ridge, stitching across the sky. She rolled the bird hard right, cutting through smoke, then leveled out over the dry riverbed. Down below, chaos. The paratroopers were still fighting. The last of their ammo was being spent in bursts that sounded more desperate than tactical. They were dragging the wounded with belts, using helmets to carry sand to douse small fires. And when they saw her again, that impossible silhouette slicing through the smoke, they knew. 2-4's back, someone screamed through the comms. She came back. She flared hard, rotors shrieking, dust swallowing everything. Keller was out of the door before the skids even hit the dirt. Go, 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 load the wounded first. Mitchell's world narrowed to motion and instinct. Every sound was muffled by adrenaline. Every light flashing red on the dash was just another heartbeat she refused to acknowledge. A PKM opened up from the ridge. The rounds hammered the fuselage, sparks spraying across the cabin. O'Hara leaned out, screaming into the wind. "Ridge left, I see him." He unleashed a storm of fire, the M240 roaring in short, brutal bursts. The gunner vanished behind dust and smoke. Mortar rounds landed closer. One blast rocked the helicopter sideways. The skids lifted, slammed down again. Mitchell fought the cyclic, teeth clenched. "Keller, we're full." "5 more," Keller shouted, dragging another man inside. "Damn it, Keller." "5 more." She didn't argue. She just held the bird steady, the blades a blur above her head, the engine screaming in protest. Finally, Keller slapped her shoulder. "That's it, go." Mitchell yanked the collective. The Hawk leapt skyward, overburdened and shaking. Tracer fire chased them like angry bees. O'Hara laid down suppressive bursts until his belt ran dry. "Reloading." "Don't bother," Mitchell said. "We're almost clear." She pulled hard to the right, banking toward the open air. The valley tilted below them, a whirl of rock, smoke, and chaos. The comms crackled. 2-4 returned to base immediately. "Do not attempt re-entry. You're ordered to stand down." Mitchell stared straight ahead, sweat running down her temples. "Negative, command, we're not done." "Mitchell." She killed the channel. Behind her, the men sat silent, gripping whatever they could. No one spoke. No one asked her to stop. They just breathed the same ragged air, listening to the sound of one woman refusing to quit. Back at Salerno, when she landed again, command was waiting. Her company commander strode toward the pad, headset still hanging around his neck. "Chief Mitchell," he shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the slowing blades. "You're grounded, that's an order." She didn't answer. The back doors opened, and the second wave of survivors poured out, coughing, limping, dragging their brothers behind them. The medics didn't wait for permission. They surged forward, lifting men onto stretchers, shouting for IVs and morphine. The commander stopped. His anger cracked for a moment. He saw the faces of the saved, bloodied, burned, breathing. He looked back at Mitchell, still seated in the cockpit, eyes hidden behind her visor. "Damn it," he whispered. Then louder, "You're done for today, you hear me?" Mitchell finally looked at him. "There are still more down there." "Those men are gone." She shook her head once. "Not yet." The commander's jaw tightened. "You take that bird back out and you're finished." Her voice was calm. "Then I'm finished." He stared at her, long, hard, searching for something that might make her stop. There wasn't any. She turned back to her controls. The turbines spooled again. Keller reloaded the ammo belts with shaking hands. O'Hara dropped into his seat, muttering, "Third time's the charm." She smiled faintly, just a ghost of it beneath the visor. "No, third time's for the rest." Minutes later, the Black Hawk roared back into the mountains. The valley was alive now, every gun turned skyward. The enemy had learned. This time they were ready. Rounds cut through the air like angry light. RPGs streaked from both sides, crossing in brutal X patterns. Keller shouted over the comms, "We can't take another hit like that." Mitchell's response was steady, almost serene. "Then we won't." She dropped lower, hugging the contours of the ground so tight the rotor wash stripped leaves from the trees. Her hands were precise, every movement deliberate, every input exact. The Black Hawk was bleeding power, but it was still obeying her. She came in from the north this time, skimming past a ridge so close the metal screamed from the friction of near impact. "LZ in sight," O'Hara called out. She flared again, dust exploding beneath the skids, visibility gone. Keller was already out of the door. "Go, move, move." Paratroopers ran through the smoke, hauling wounded, weapons clattering. They shoved men inside, packing tighter than air should allow. Bullets chewed the ground around them. One struck the door, ricocheted off the frame, slicing Keller's sleeve. He didn't stop. "Go," he shouted again. The last man stumbled aboard, dragging a body with him. Keller slammed the door shut. "Up, up, up." Mitchell pulled collective, the bird groaning, tail sagging under the impossible load. A mortar landed behind them, too close. The shockwave hit like a fist. "Hold together," she whispered. "Just hold together." The bird climbed, slowly, reluctantly, but it climbed. Through the storm of tracer fire and smoke, through the sound of hell screaming at their backs, it climbed. Inside no one spoke, some prayed, some just stared at her. And for the first time all day, Sarah Mitchell's hands began to tremble. Not from fear. From the realization of what she'd just done. She had gone back. Twice. And she wasn't finished. Because there were still men alive in that valley. And she'd already made her choice. She wasn't turning back, not until the last of them was gone. How many times can one pilot fly through hell before the fire learns her name? Sarah Mitchell was about to find out. By the time she brought her second load of survivors home, the valley behind her was roaring with vengeance. Every gun, every mortar, every RPG tube had turned its gaze to the sky, to her. At FOB Salerno, the landing pad had turned into chaos, medics racing stretchers, mechanics screaming for fuel lines, soldiers forming human chains to offload the wounded. The rescued paratroopers stumbled out of the Black Hawk like ghosts reborn. One of them, a young corporal with half his sleeve torn away, grabbed Mitchell's arm as he was carried past. "You came back," he whispered. She met his eyes, dirt and blood mixing on both of their faces. "Yeah," she said quietly, "and I'm not done yet." The tower called through her headset. 2-4, stand down, you've done enough. We've got fixed-wing inbound." But enough was a word that didn't fit what was still happening out there. She turned to her crew. "Refuel her," she ordered. Keller froze. "Ma'am, the transmission's running hot. Hydraulics are bleeding. You'll seize the system before we hit the ridge." Mitchell's tone stayed calm, but her eyes didn't blink. "Then we better not hit it." O'Hara looked between them. "Ma'am, you really going back in?" She didn't answer directly. She simply reached up, ran her hand along the Black Hawk's side again, the same motion she always did before takeoff. This time it felt like a prayer. Then she climbed back into the cockpit. Keller muttered under his breath, "Guess we're doing this." O'Hara smirked nervously. "You kidding? If we're going out with her." The turbines screamed back to life, the rotors spinning up with that familiar metallic thunder, but now it sounded older, angrier. The bird had been pushed past its limit. Every vibration felt personal. Mitchell eased the throttle. The helicopter lifted in a swirl of dust and grit. This time, no one on the ground waved. They just watched her go, that same small figure in the pilot's seat, flying into a place even the brave called cursed. The mountains swallowed her again. The air grew thinner, the sunlight harsher, the static louder. Smoke from the valley drifted upward in long, dark ribbons. "Eyes open," Mitchell said, scanning the ridgelines. "They know our approach this time." She was right. As soon as she crested the last ridge, tracer rounds erupted like fireworks. RPGs sliced through the sky, crossing in front of her nose like spears of light. "Break right," O'Hara yelled. Mitchell threw the cyclic hard. The Black Hawk rolled, the world flipping sideways, ground, sky, then leveled again. The left door took a hit, shattering a panel. Wind screamed through the cockpit. "Damage," Keller called. "Talk to me." Tail sections peppered, hydraulics yellow. "That's 3 hits in 30 seconds. Mitchell's voice didn't rise. "We've had worse." "Not this bad." She dipped the bird low, dragging the skids through the smoke, skimming the riverbed. The mountains loomed like black jaws on either side. Every turn felt tighter, the margin thinner. And then she saw them. The last pockets of paratroopers, huddled behind craters and rocks. They were almost out of ammo, firing short, hopeless bursts. When they spotted the helicopter, their heads lifted as if they couldn't believe it. "She's back," someone said over the net, voice cracking. "She actually came back." Mitchell flared the Hawk, dropped into the same death trap she'd escaped twice before. The skids slammed into the dirt, rotors chopping through the smoke like wings of an angel or a demon, depending on which side of the war you stood on. "Move," Keller shouted. "Last lift, get your wounded in." The paratroopers surged forward, dragging comrades who could no longer walk, lifting them like children, tossing them aboard. The cabin filled in seconds, boots, rifles, sweat and blood merging into one chaotic mass of survival. O'Hara fired short bursts at the ridges, suppressing where he could. The belt jammed halfway through. He cleared it with one hand and kept firing with the other. Bullets pinged off the armor plating. One round punched through the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass inches from Mitchell's head. She didn't flinch. Come on," she whispered to the helicopter like it could hear her. "Stay with me." Keller's status. "Overload, we're 20 over." "Then hold them tight." "Ma'am, we can't lift." She slammed the throttle forward. "We're lifting." The Hawk roared, engines howling in protest. The skids scraped the dirt, threw sparks, then broke free. Tracer rounds followed them up like fireflies of death. The bird climbed sideways, banking into a shallow escape curve. "Hold together," Mitchell said through clenched teeth. "Just hold together." Halfway out of the valley, the left hydraulic system failed. The stick went heavy, sluggish, like dragging a dead weight through air. The alarm screamed in her ears, but she barely heard them. Her arms ached, every muscle trembling as she fought to keep the nose level. "Hydraulics red," Keller shouted. "We've got fluid on the deck." O'Hara cursed. "We're leaking everything. You've got to land her, ma'am." "Not here," Mitchell snapped. "Not yet." She forced the cyclic right, coaxing the bird toward the ridgeline. The Black Hawk groaned, shaking, whining like it was alive and in pain. O'Hara looked down at the floor, at the wounded packed shoulder to shoulder, blood pooling beneath their boots. He muttered, "They don't even know how close we are." Mitchell whispered almost to herself, "Good, they don't need to." Outside, the world blurred past trees, cliffs, smoke. The engine strained for altitude. The vibration was relentless. Every second felt like flying on borrowed faith. Then a flash. A new threat. "RPG 2 o'clock, Keller shouted. Mitchell jerked the cyclic. The rocket missed by yards, close enough to rock the bird with its shockwave. Shrapnel rattled off the hull. The cabin filled with screams, shouted prayers, the stench of smoke and metal. Mitchell's eyes never left the horizon. Her lips moved, barely audible under the noise. Not yet, hold." The ridge finally broke open, revealing the sky beyond, the faint shimmer of the base in the far distance. "Come on," she whispered again, coaxing the bird higher. "Just a little more." Then suddenly the shaking eased, the screaming metal calmed. The helicopter leveled, and for the first time in an hour, the only sound was the thump of the blades, steady, rhythmic, alive. Inside, men began to sob. Some laughed, that wild, hollow laughter that comes after surviving something you shouldn't have. Keller leaned back, exhausted. "They're all here, ma'am, everyone." Mitchell didn't smile, not yet. Her hand still gripped the cyclic, knuckles white. She couldn't let herself feel relief, not until the wheels touched the pad. But she allowed herself one breath. One small, shaking breath. Because this time, they'd made it again. When she landed at Salerno for the third time, the crowd was already waiting. Mechanics, medics, soldiers, everyone who had thought she was dead the moment she lifted off the second time. They didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They just watched as the doors opened and more survivors spilled out. Men from the 504th, bloody, limping, dazed, looked at her through the glass of the cockpit as they passed. Some saluted. Some simply touched the fuselage. Keller climbed out after them, face gray with exhaustion. He looked at her and said the words she didn't want to hear. "Ma'am, we can't do another run." Mitchell's voice was quiet. "There are still more." He shook his head. "We won't make it back." She looked out toward the horizon, the smoke still rising from the valley, the faint glimmer of tracer fire flickering even now. "Then we'll make it back once more," she said. "That's all that matters." O'Hara stared at her, eyes wide. "You're serious?" Mitchell met his gaze. "You think I came this far to leave the rest behind?" Keller swallowed hard. "Ma'am, this bird's got holes in her skin, cracks in her panel, hydraulics nearly gone. She's held together by willpower." Mitchell reached down and touched the console, the metal warm under her gloves. "Then she still has mine." For a long moment no one moved. The air was still. Only the tick of cooling metal filled the silence. Then Keller nodded once. "All right, let's go get them." O'Hara grinned, tired but fierce. "You heard the lady." The engine spooled one last time. As the rotors built speed, the flight line crew stepped back. Some crossed themselves. Others simply watched, silent, as the Black Hawk, battered, scarred, defiant, lifted off again. And this time, even the commander didn't try to stop her. He just stood at the edge of the pad, headset hanging at his side, watching the shrinking dot rise into the sky and whispering what everyone else already knew. "She's going back." And deep down, every man who saw her lift off that final time felt it in his bones, the quiet truth that would echo long after the battle was over. Some heroes don't turn back because they're fearless. They turn back because others can't. How far can courage go before it breaks? How many times can one woman gamble her life, and everyone else's, before fate calls her bluff? Sarah Mitchell didn't think about that. She didn't have the luxury. All she knew was this: there were still men alive down there. And until every one of them was out, she wasn't finished. The sky was burning when she lifted off again. The sun had dropped behind the ridgelines, turning the mountains into black silhouettes cut from fire. The air shimmered with heat and smoke. The Black Hawk rose through it, battered, limping but defiant. Inside the cockpit, warning lights glowed like a Christmas tree. Hydraulic pressure low. Engine temperature critical. Tail torque unstable. Keller called it out, his voice hoarse. "She's bleeding, ma'am. One hit and we're falling out of the sky." Mitchell's hands were steady on the cyclic. "Then we don't get hit." O'Hara forced a smile from the gunner's seat. "You know, that's not really how math works." Mitchell glanced at him, visor reflecting the fire glow outside. "It is today." As they crossed into the valley again, the world exploded around them. Tracer fire rose in sheets, green, red, orange. RPGs spiraled upward, hissing like demons. Every weapon on the ground was aimed at one thing: the lone helicopter that had humiliated their ambush. Mitchell rolled hard right, dove low, then pitched up through a gap between cliffs. The rotors screamed, clipping the edges of rock that felt close enough to touch. 2-4, this is command. The radio was alive again, voices desperate. Abort your run, repeat, abort. You won't survive another pass. She keyed her mic for a single word. Negative. And killed the channel. Below, the paratroopers were almost gone, down to their last dozen survivors, pressed into a shallow ravine. Some were dragging the wounded, others firing single rounds at shapes in the smoke. When the soldiers heard her rotors again, they looked up like men seeing the sun after weeks underground. 2-4's back, a voice screamed through the net. The last time. The last chance. Mitchell flared hard, engines howling, the Black Hawk slamming into the dirt with a force that rattled every bolt. Dust swallowed the world. Visibility, 0. Keller was already out, shouting through the storm. Go, move, move. Paratroopers broke cover, sprinting through smoke, dragging men by their flak vests, shouting names that were almost drowned out by the sound of incoming fire. RPGs hissed from the ridges. One detonated close enough to slap the helicopter sideways. Tail hit, Keller yelled. We've lost stabilizer control. O'Hara leaned out, his M240 blazing in short bursts. Suppressing, suppressing. A round tore through the open door, cutting across the gunner's seat belt. O'Hara flinched, blood spattering his sleeve, but he didn't stop firing. Mitchell fought the controls, the stick heavy, sluggish, vibrating with every heartbeat. The bird was dying beneath her hands, but it was still flying, still fighting. Come on, you stubborn thing, she muttered under her breath. Not yet. Another mortar hit. The shockwave threw dirt and rock through the cabin. The paratroopers screamed. One soldier fell just short of the ramp. Keller grabbed his vest, hauled him in with both hands, grunting through clenched teeth. Go, that's everyone. Mitchell didn't wait. She pulled the collective. The engines howled. The skids scraped rock, shrieked, and lifted. The helicopter clawed at the air, shuddering, fighting gravity like it hated her. Come on, come on. Tracer fire stitched across the tail. Sparks burst like fireworks. The warning panel flashed red. Hydraulic failure. Engine 2 over torque. Ma'am, Keller shouted, we're not gonna hold it. Hold it anyway, she snapped. The Black Hawk bucked, shaking, screaming through the air like a living thing refusing to die. Mitchell's arms trembled from the force on the controls. They were climbing barely. Every second stretched thin, every breath was a prayer. And then another impact. A deafening crack ripped through the fuselage. The cabin filled with smoke. Hydraulics gone, Keller shouted. Tails hit bad. Brace, Mitchell yelled. The bird dropped 30 feet in a heartbeat, slammed back into an updraft, and somehow, impossibly, leveled out. The rotors were bleeding RPM. The tail rotor was fighting to stay synchronized. The whole aircraft was one bad second from tearing itself apart. Mitchell's voice was calm, almost eerily so. We're fine, stay with me. Fine, O'Hara coughed, choking on smoke. We're flying a dying bird through a damn volcano. She didn't look back. Then she'll die doing her job. They broke over the last ridge with the engine screaming in pain. The airframe vibrated so violently Keller thought it might split. But through that chaos, they saw it, the open sky, the faint shape of Fob Salerno on the horizon. O'Hara slumped back, exhaling a laugh that was half sob, half disbelief. We're clear, we're actually. Then a tone pierced the cockpit. A shrill digital scream. Missile lock, Keller shouted. Mitchell's blood ran cold. From where? Right ridge, they've got a MANPAD. Flares out, O'Hara yelled, slamming the switch. Bright streaks of magnesium shot from the helicopter, trailing white smoke, brilliant, burning, desperate. A flash from the ridge. Then the missile, a silver dart of death streaking straight toward them. Mitchell's voice was calm, but her hands moved faster than thought. Nose down, drop now. The Black Hawk plunged, a controlled fall through chaos. The missile chased, weaving through flares. Come on, she whispered, come on. At the last second, she banked hard left, pulling the helicopter into a turn so brutal that men in the cabin screamed as they slammed against the bulkheads. The missile overshot, hit a flare, detonated. The shockwave hit them like a hammer. The bird rolled sideways, smoke filling the cabin, alarms blaring. Keller's voice cracked over the intercom. We've lost tail authority, we're spinning. Mitchell fought the controls, muscles locking, teeth grinding. The world blurred, sky, dirt, smoke, sky again. She forced the cyclic forward, countering the spin, coaxing the nose down, begging the machine with every ounce of strength she had left. Come on, baby, stay with me. The Black Hawk groaned, shuddered, and stopped spinning. For a second, everything was still. Then the faint outline of the base appeared ahead. Pad in sight, she whispered. The comms crackled. 2-4, is that you? Say again, is that 2-4? Her voice was barely audible, still flying. They came in low, limping, metal bleeding smoke. Every alarm was screaming now: hydraulic failure, transmission heat, engine warning. Keller's voice trembled. We're not gonna make the pad. Yes, we are. Hydraulics are gone. Then I'll fly without them. She coaxed the collective, feeling the weight of the machine through her bones. The skids barely cleared the perimeter fence. The engines were giving everything they had left. And somehow, impossibly, the pad appeared beneath them. Hold on, she shouted. The Black Hawk slammed down hard, the impact rattling every rib, every bolt, every bone. One of the skids collapsed. The tail struck concrete. The whole aircraft groaned, bending but not breaking. Then silence. The rotors slowed, the engines died, the world stopped shaking. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Keller's voice, soft, disbelieving. We're on the ground. Mitchell didn't answer. She just sat there, visor down, hands frozen on the cyclic. O'Hara unbuckled slowly, coughing through smoke. We made it. Then the doors opened. The paratroopers poured out, not running, not shouting, just stumbling into the open air, collapsing onto the pad. Medics rushed forward, shouting orders, lifting bodies, dragging stretchers. Behind them, soldiers on the flight line froze. Every single one of them turned toward the helicopter, this shredded, bullet-riddled shell, and saw Sarah Mitchell climb out. She took her helmet off. Her hair was plastered with sweat, her face streaked with grime. Her hands trembled so badly she had to steady them against the fuselage. But her eyes were steady. The base went silent. Then, one by one, soldiers began to raise their hands in salute. Mechanics, cooks, clerks, medics. No one told them to. They just did. Because what they were seeing wasn't protocol. It was respect. Keller stood beside her, voice thick. We got them all. She nodded, whispering, all of them. And for the first time that day, the first time in hours of chaos, fire, and near death, she allowed herself to breathe. The Black Hawk groaned behind her, metal cooling, smoke rising from its panels like an old warrior finally resting after the last fight. And in that silence, as 250 men walked, limped, crawled out alive, Sarah Mitchell finally understood what courage really meant. It wasn't a feeling. It wasn't glory. It was just the refusal to stop when stopping meant death for someone else. That day, one pilot didn't turn back. And because of that, an entire battalion lived. How do you walk away from something like that? From fire and smoke and death that refuse to take you. Most people cheer when they survive. But when Sarah Mitchell stepped off her Black Hawk that night, no one cheered. The sound on the pad wasn't victory. It was breathing, heavy, stunned human breathing. the kind that comes after the world almost ends. The medics worked fast. Stretchers raced toward the medical tents, voices echoing across the base. Critical here, move him now. Watch that shrapnel wound, 2 more incoming. Mitchell stood beside the helicopter, helmet still in her hand, staring at nothing. Her ears rang. Her uniform was soaked with sweat and smoke. Her bird tail number 31 was no longer a machine. It was a wreck held together by stubbornness and faith. Holes peppered the fuselage. One rotor blade was split down the middle. The hydraulic lines leaked fluid that shimmered red under the floodlights. But it had flown. It had lived. Keller walked up, wiping soot from his face. His hands were shaking. "Engines are done," he said quietly. "Hydraulics too, she won't fly again." Mitchell nodded once. She did her part. O'Hara limped over next, arm bandaged, exhaustion written in every movement. He tried to grin, but his voice cracked. "Ma'am, that was insane." Mitchell almost smiled. "Yeah, it was." He looked at the line of stretchers moving toward the field hospital. "But they're alive, every damn one." She didn't reply. She didn't have to. Her commanding officer arrived minutes later, boots crunching against the concrete, face hard as granite. "Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell," he barked. She straightened automatically, helmet under her arm. "Sir." He stopped a few paces away, looking past her at the battered helicopter, then back to her. His jaw worked. His eyes flickered with something: anger, awe, disbelief, maybe all 3. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. "You flew into an active kill zone 4 times. You risked your crew, your aircraft, and yourself. Do you have any idea what kind of hell this is going to raise?" Mitchell didn't flinch. Her voice was soft, almost flat. "Yes, sir." He took a breath through his teeth. "Then why?" She didn't look away. "Because they were still alive, and if we'd waited they wouldn't be." The words landed heavy. No excuses, no defiance, just truth. The commander stood there for a long moment, the night stretching between them. Finally he exhaled. "You also brought home every last man." Mitchell didn't respond. He turned his head, looking again at the line of stretchers disappearing into the dark. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. "You'll be written up for this, you know that." "I do, sir." He nodded slowly. "Then get your crew checked by medical, and Mitchell." "Yes, sir." He paused. "Don't go far. Hire's going to want to talk to you." She watched him walk away, his silhouette shrinking into the glare of the floodlights. Hours later, the base finally went quiet. The last helicopter engines shut down. The medics' shouts faded to murmurs. Even the generators seemed to hum softer, like the camp itself was catching its breath. Mitchell sat alone by the wreck of her Black Hawk. The metal was cool now. The air smelled of oil and dust. Every joint in her body ached, her muscles cramped from hours of strain. She flexed her hands, still trembling. Keller found her there. He carried 2 paper cups of instant coffee, black, burned, perfect. He handed one to her, without a word. She took it, nodded her thanks, and stared at the horizon where the valley still smoldered. "They're saying you brought back 250 men," Keller said quietly. She took a sip. The coffee tasted like ash. 250 and change. He looked at her, eyes bloodshot but proud. "You know what they're calling you?" "No," she said. "The one who refused to turn back." Mitchell gave a tired half-smile. "They can call me whatever they want. I just didn't want to count body bags." They sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. By morning, word had spread. Across the base, across the network, across every forward post within radio range. Black Hawk 24 made it out. Mitchell brought them home. 0 left behind. Men who had never met her said her name like it was an answer to something. Mechanics who had watched her take off expecting to watch her die, now touched the bullet holes in the fuselage like relics. The 504th, the same paratroopers she'd rescued, formed up in the morning light. They were battered, bandaged, limping, but alive, every one of them. Their commander, a tall man with a cracked voice and blood still on his boots, stood in front of the formation. He looked over his men, then turned as Mitchell approached. She stopped a few yards away, uniform dusty, helmet under her arm. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then he stepped forward and saluted. Mitchell returned it. And behind him, all 250 men raised their hands in unison. The sound of boots snapping together rolled across the flight line like thunder. It wasn't ceremony. It wasn't for the cameras or the brass. It was for her. Keller stood off to the side, jaw tight, eyes wet. O'Hara leaned on a crutch, grinning through the pain. And Mitchell, silent, motionless, felt the weight of it hit her chest like a second heartbeat. Not glory. Not pride. Just the quiet understanding that something sacred had happened out there, something words couldn't quite touch. Later that day, she sat in a briefing tent under fluorescent lights that hummed too loud, filling out the first of what would become stacks of paperwork. Questions repeated in loops. Why did you disobey? What was your risk assessment? Did you understand the consequences? She answered each one the same way. Because they were alive, because if I hadn't gone, they wouldn't be. The officer behind the desk didn't look up. He just wrote, pen scratching across paper. When it was over, Mitchell signed her name and stood. Outside, the sun was already dipping low again. The pad shimmered in the distance. The ruined silhouette of her Black Hawk sat under a tarp, silent and still. O'Hara was there, sitting on the skids, humming quietly. Keller stood beside him, grease on his hands, eyes following her. You think they'll ground you? O'Hara asked. Mitchell shrugged, maybe. Maybe they'll give you a medal. She smirked faintly, or a reprimand. Keller chuckled dryly, could be both. Mitchell looked at the horizon again. The valley was quiet now. No smoke, no sound of war, just the wind. I'll take the reprimand, she said. The men were worth it. That night the base was restless. You could feel it in the air, the weight of what had happened. Every tent, every corridor, every table in the chow hall buzzed with the same story. She went back. 4 times. Alone. And brought everyone out. Mechanics repeated it with awe. Infantrymen told it like gospel. And across the base, a kind of unspoken shift had taken hold. The rule book hadn't changed. But something else had. The belief that sometimes you have to break orders to do what's right. In her barracks that night, Sarah Mitchell sat on the edge of her bunk. Her hands were raw, knuckles bruised, fingertips burned from metal controls. The noise of the day replayed in her head, the gunfire, the screaming, the rotors. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since dawn she felt it, the exhaustion, the ache, the cost. But underneath all of it, something quieter. Peace. Because somewhere out there, 250 men were still breathing. And that, she thought, was enough. What happens when the war quiets, but the noise inside you does? For Sarah Mitchell, silence was supposed to mean safety. Instead, it felt heavier than gunfire. Days passed. The valley where she'd flown through fire was quiet now, cold, windless, stripped bare of sound. But at Fob Salerno, the noise had only grown. Reports, debriefs, investigations. Everyone wanted to know how one pilot, the one they ordered to stand down, had pulled 250 men out of a kill zone no one else would enter. Some called it a miracle. Others called it reckless. The paperwork called it unauthorized operation resulting in preservation of life under extreme combat conditions. That was the Army's way of saying, we can't explain it, but we can't ignore it either. Mitchell sat in the operations tent again. the same one where she'd first seen the words "Do not launch." Now the board was clean. No names, no tags, no red ink. Just maps and silence. A major from division headquarters sat across from her. His uniform was crisp, his notepad empty except for the first line. Subject: unauthorized action. He spoke like a man who'd practiced the speech a dozen times. "Chief Mitchell," he said, "you disobeyed direct orders. You endangered a multi-million-dollar aircraft. You risked your crew without clearance." She nodded once. "Yes, sir." He looked up, waiting for her to add something. She didn't. He sighed. "Help me understand why." Mitchell kept her voice even. Because they were still alive, and because waiting would have meant watching them die. The major leaned back, studying her. "You know the chain of command exists for a reason." "Yes, sir." "And that disobedience, even with good intentions, undermines that chain." "I do." "Then why take it upon yourself?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "Because sometimes the book isn't fast enough." The room went quiet. He didn't have an answer for that. After a long moment, he closed his notepad. "You'll receive formal reprimand paperwork within the week." Mitchell nodded again. "Understood." He hesitated before standing. "For what it's worth, my brother was 504th. You did right by them." She didn't smile, but her voice softened. They did right by each other. Outside, the base was different now. When she walked the flight line, soldiers paused mid-task. Some nodded, some saluted, most just watched her quietly, respectfully. Mechanics had patched her helicopter as best they could. They cleaned the blood from the cabin, replaced panels, scrubbed away soot. But the scars were still there, small, jagged reminders that no machine truly forgets what it survives. Keller was leaning against the fuselage when she arrived. "Inspection team came by," he said. "Said she's unserviceable. They're going to ship her back to Bagram for parts." Mitchell ran her fingers along the bullet holes. "She earned her rest." O'Hara walked up behind them, limping slightly. "They should put her in a museum." Keller smirked. "They don't make museums for people who break orders." Mitchell's lips curved faintly. "Then they should start." They all laughed, the kind of tired, broken laugh that lives somewhere between relief and disbelief. That evening, the chow hall was louder than usual. Word had spread beyond Salerno now, across the whole region. Helicopter crews, medevac pilots, even fixed-wing guys passing through all wanted to hear it firsthand. She went back 4 times. No escort, no gunships. Brought them all back. Some called it madness. Others called it the purest kind of courage. Mitchell didn't join in. She sat at a corner table with her crew, quietly eating, listening to the murmurs ripple through the room like a storm she couldn't control. O'Hara leaned toward her. "You realize this story's already out there, right? They'll be telling it in every hangar from here to Rucker." Mitchell poked at her food. "Then let them tell it right." Keller nodded slowly. "You think they will?" She looked up, eyes thoughtful. "Probably not, but maybe someone will learn from it." And someone did. A week later, instructors from aviation units began arriving at Salerno. One wore an Apache patch, another was medevac, a third was from the assault training battalion out of Jalalabad. They didn't come for a ceremony. They came for lessons. They crowded around her in the operations tent, notebooks open, listening as she broke down what she'd done, not like a hero telling a story, but like a pilot deconstructing a near crash. "Altitude management in ambush zones," she said, tracing a map with her pen. "Stay under the mortar cone. You'll trade speed for survivability." She marked another point. "Load limits, don't trust the numbers in the book. Trust the aircraft's behavior. You'll feel the drag before the instruments tell you." They asked questions. She answered quietly, methodically. No dramatics, no bravado. Just cold, learned survival. and as she spoke, they scribbled notes. Doctrine began to shift, not with announcements or medals, but with understanding. What she had done became a case study in calculated disobedience. How to adapt when the book doesn't fit the battlefield. A small change, one line in a future flight manual. Commanders may authorize deviation from standing orders in extreme rescue circumstances, provided pilot judgment deems delay untenable. A rule born from her breaking one. Weeks passed. The reprimand came through. A single sheet of paper. Formal, cold, signed by officers who hadn't seen what she saw. It read, reprimanded for willful disobedience of direct command, resulting in unnecessary risk to personnel and equipment. Keller handed it to her in silence. She read it once, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her logbook. O'Hara frowned. That's it, that's all they're giving you. She smiled faintly. That's all they can give. Then softer, the rest doesn't fit on paper. A few nights later, her company commander found her standing alone by the flight line. The lights were dim, the desert wind cool for the first time in days. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets, the same man who told her that's final before she launched. I owe you an apology, he said. Mitchell didn't look at him. For what? For thinking courage looks like compliance. She turned to face him. I disobeyed, sir, you weren't wrong. Maybe, he said, but sometimes the lanes are drawn wrong. He hesitated. Maybe you just showed us where they should have been. Mitchell looked back toward the horizon, where the valley lay dark and silent now. Nothing about that felt brave, she said quietly. It just felt necessary. He nodded. That's what makes it brave. He left her there under the dim lights, standing beside the bird that wouldn't fly again, a ghost of steel and memory. That night she wrote her after-action notes. She didn't write about glory or defiance. She wrote about preparation, calculation, and the human math of survival, the inches, seconds, and decisions that made the difference between life and death. At the bottom of the report, she added one final line in her neat, precise handwriting. Careful isn't weakness. Careful is courage measured in inches. She closed the folder, set it aside, and finally turned off the light. Outside, the desert was silent again. But the world had already changed, quietly, permanently, because one pilot refused to turn back. How do you reward someone for breaking the rules, when breaking them was the only right thing to do? That was the question hanging over every desk, every inbox, every chain of command memo from Salerno to the Pentagon. And while officers argued policy, soldiers told a story. In every chow hall, every flight line, every dusty tent across the mountains, the same words whispered over and over. She went back. 4 times. No escort. No gunships. No orders. And brought them all out. At first the story was fragmented, half rumor, half disbelief, but it spread like wildfire through every unit in the region. The kind of story no briefing could contain. Mechanics who'd touched the bullet holes in her Black Hawk told it like myth. Pilots retold it like gospel. And the paratroopers, the ones she'd saved, spoke of it in the quiet tone soldiers reserve for things too big to fit into words. Careful, one of them said, that's what she kept saying. Careful isn't scared, careful gets you home. That line stuck. By the end of the month, it was painted in black marker across flight bay walls. Careful isn't scared. Careful gets you home. Misspelled, but no one cared. For Sarah Mitchell, it didn't feel like legend. It felt like aftermath. Her name was in reports, her signature on reprimands, her face in no photographs. The Army didn't know whether to make her a symbol or a warning. The medal citations took weeks to crawl through channels. When they arrived, the wording was cautious, bureaucratic, polished to remove anything too real. extraordinary valor in support of ground forces under extreme fire. That was all it said. No mention of disobedience. No mention of four, unescorted, runs into an ambush valley. She received the award in the hangar, surrounded by a few dozen soldiers. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. No photographers, no speeches, just protocol. Her commanding officer pinned the medal to her chest and stepped back. When he saluted, his voice was rough. "Officially," he said, "you're reprimanded. Unofficially, you set the bar." Mitchell saluted back, "Thank you, sir." He leaned closer. "For what it's worth, I would have followed you in." She nodded, "Then I did my job." After the ceremony, her crew found her sitting beside her helicopter again, tail number 31, stripped for transport. The smell of fuel and dust lingered in the air. Keller leaned against the fuselage, arms crossed. "You ever gonna let them move her?" Mitchell traced a bullet hole with her fingertip. "They can move her. They can't erase her." O'Hara grinned faintly. "You know they're sending her back to the States, right? Fort Rucker. They'll use her for training lectures." Mitchell smiled just a little. "Good. Maybe she'll teach them something." Weeks later, the Army Aviation Center at Fort Rucker added a new case study to its curriculum. A 60-pilot decision-making under extreme combat conditions, the Salerno extraction. Her name was on the title page. The report didn't glorify her, it dissected her. Every flight path, every deviation from command, every second between mortar impacts, studied, graphed, analyzed. But buried in the appendix was one paragraph she'd written herself, copied word for word from her debrief. "Courage isn't defying command. It's understanding the cost of waiting too long to act. I didn't fly because I wanted to be brave. I flew because they were still alive." That paragraph started appearing in hangars and classrooms all over the world. Sometimes framed, sometimes handwritten, always remembered. Back at Salerno, life went on. Missions resumed, new names filled the board. But everyone who'd been there the day she landed still remembered. The 504th held a small formation before rotating out. The paratroopers lined up on the same pad she'd touched down on, the same one still scarred from her last landing. Their battalion commander faced them, voice low and steady. "Every one of you owes your life to a pilot who decided waiting wasn't an option," he said. "Remember that the next time someone tells you courage is about orders." Then he turned to Mitchell, who stood at attention beside her crew. He saluted her, sharp, crisp, deliberate. "250 men accounted for," he said. "You gave them back to me." Mitchell returned the salute. "Glad they're yours again, sir." When he dropped his hand, the entire formation followed. The sound of 250 boots hitting concrete in unison rolled across the valley like thunder. Keller whispered under his breath, "You hearing that?" O'Hara smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's what gratitude sounds like." But heroes don't live in parades. They live in the spaces after. The quiet moments when the adrenaline fades and the memories don't. For Mitchell, those moments came at dawn. She'd walk the flight line alone, watching the sky turn from violet to gold, the turbines still silent, the air cold and still. She'd pause by the empty spot where her helicopter had sat, run her hand through the air like she could still feel the warmth of the metal. Some mornings, soldiers from the 504th would pass by. They'd nod or stop or offer a quiet salute. Some said nothing at all, just touched the ground where the skids had once rested. It wasn't ceremony. It was memory. And memory, she realized, lasts longer than medals. One night, Keller found her sitting by the runway lights, staring out at the horizon. "You ever think about going home?" he asked. Mitchell shrugged, "Sometimes." "What stops you?" She smiled faintly. "Home's just wherever they still need you." He sat beside her. "They're gonna talk about you for a long time." "Let them talk," she said, "as long as they remember the lesson." "What lesson, that?" Mitchell looked at the dark outline of the mountains, the same ridges she'd flown through. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "That careful isn't weakness. It's knowing the difference between risk and sacrifice." Keller nodded slowly. "Yeah, you showed them that." She shook her head. "No, the men on the ground did. I just flew where they needed me to." The wind picked up, tugging at their sleeves. For a while, neither of them spoke. The night hummed with distant generators, the faint sound of a rotor somewhere far away. Finally, Keller said quietly, "You ever think about what you'd have done if you hadn't made it?" Mitchell stared at the stars. "I did make it." He smiled. "Yeah, you did." By the end of her deployment, the reprimand was still in her file. It always would be. But so was something else. A commendation signed by generals who never met her but knew her story. And a line added to the Army's aviation manual. In extraordinary circumstances, initiative may be the highest form of discipline. That was her legacy. Not the medal, not the story, but the quiet rewriting of what courage could mean. What do you do when the war ends, but it doesn't leave you? When the body comes home, but the mind still circles the valley? Sarah Mitchell didn't talk much about it. She didn't have to. The people who'd been there, who saw the smoke rise, who felt the ground tremble under the rotors of her Black Hawk, they already knew. The rest would never understand. And that was fine. Months later, she stood on a quiet tarmac back in the States. Different air, different sky, but the sound of helicopters still lived somewhere in her chest. The base commander handed her transfer papers. "You're cleared for stateside duty," he said. "You could teach or fly medevac, your choice." Mitchell looked out toward the hangars. A line of new US-60s shimmered in the sun, clean, unscarred, perfect. She nodded slowly. "I'll teach." He smiled faintly. "Figures." She saluted, turned, and walked away. Fort Rucker smelled different: pine trees, diesel, and the faint sweetness of cut grass. Her first day there, she stood at the front of a classroom filled with young pilots, fresh faces, sharp uniforms, eyes full of that dangerous mix of fear and confidence. Behind her, a projector screen glowed with the title, "Decision-Making Under Fire, the Salerno Case." She didn't tell them it was her. She didn't need to. She just pressed play. The footage was grainy drone recon from above the valley. Explosions, smoke, a single dot moving through the chaos, landing again and again under fire. The room went silent. She let them watch. When the lights came back on, she said quietly, "You don't have to be fearless. You just have to make the choice you can live with." A hand went up in the back. "Ma'am, did that pilot survive?" She paused, the faintest smile in her voice. "She did." The class exhaled, half relieved, half in awe. Then she said, softer, "But parts of her stayed there." After class, she'd walk the training field, watching the next generation lift off into bright Alabama skies. The sound of rotors above her was softer now, almost kind. Sometimes she'd close her eyes and imagine the desert wind again, the heat, the dust, the smell of burning hydraulic fluid. And sometimes she'd whisper to herself, "You did your job." Not to boast, just to remind the part of her that still didn't believe it. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a folded photograph, a platoon of men standing together in front of a banner that read 504th, home and whole. On the back in black ink were 4 words: "Because you didn't turn back." She sat at her desk for a long time, staring at those words until they blurred. Then she placed the photo inside her flight log, the same one that held her reprimand, and closed it carefully. Years passed. Pilots came and went. New wars started, old ones ended, and technology kept rewriting the way men and women fought and survived. But somewhere in every aviation unit, her name stayed. Sometimes spoken, sometimes just remembered. A story told to new recruits. Once, a Black Hawk pilot broke orders to save a battalion. They tried to reprimand her, but instead, they rewrote the rules. When she finally retired, it wasn't with fanfare. No cameras, no speeches. Just a quiet ceremony in the same hangar where she'd once taught. Her crew was there: Keller, older now, with a scar along his jaw and the same grin. O'Hara, too, walking without his crutch this time, hands tucked in his pockets. Her commanding officer, the one who'd once ordered her to stand down, stood front and center. When it came time to speak, he cleared his throat, voice steady but soft. "There are rules," he said, "and then there are moments when rules aren't enough. Sarah Mitchell taught us the difference." He looked at her then, really looked at her. She reminded us that discipline isn't obedience. It's doing what's right when no one's watching. Applause followed, quiet, respectful, real. Not for rank, not for medals, for something simpler. For the kind of courage that doesn't shout. After everyone left, she stayed behind. The hangar was empty now, golden lights slanting across the concrete. Dust floated in the air, glowing like tiny embers. In the far corner, under a canvas tarp, sat a single Black Hawk shell stripped of parts, but still whole enough to recognize. Tail number 31. She walked over, ran her hand along the metal. The paint was faded, but the scars were still there: bullet holes, patch marks, scratches that told the truth no report ever could. She placed her palm flat against the fuselage. "Still with me," she whispered. For a moment she closed her eyes and heard it again: the scream of the rotors, the hum of the hydraulics, the sound of men shouting her name through smoke. And just like that, she wasn't in a hangar anymore. She was back there in the valley, sky on fire, heart steady, hands sure. The day she refused to turn back. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust through the open hangar doors. It rustled her flight patch, the one that still bore the faded insignia of the 160th SOAR. Mitchell smiled softly, turned, and started walking toward the sunlight. And as she stepped into the open air, the light caught the metal on her uniform, not gleaming, not bright, just quietly reflecting everything she'd done. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.